You're about to listen to a new episode of the Redefining CyberSecurity Podcast with Sean Martin. Have you ever thought we're selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Well, perhaps we are. Let's look at how we can organize a successful information security program that integrates business culture with people, process, and technology to drive growth and protect business value.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
Pentera, the leader in automation security validation, allows organizations to continuously test the integrity of all cybersecurity layers by emulating real-world attacks at scale to pinpoint the exploitable vulnerabilities and prioritize remediation towards business impact. Learn more at Pentera.io.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, your host. And as you know, if you listen to the show, I get to talk to all kinds of cool people about cool topics. And there's one in particular you can't seem to get away from. It's on everybody's mind, everybody's tongue, and everybody's tech stack, I think, as well, whether they like it or not. And of course, I'm talking about artificial intelligence and all the variants of that and machine learning and whatnot. And I'm thrilled for this. It's a panel series we've been talking about for a while, and we've been able to pull this first episode together, and we'll have many more following this, looking at different topics. So depending on what we talk about today, that might trigger the next one. And of course, if you're listening and you have thoughts on what we want to cover next, just let us know in the comments. I want to introduce the whole panel. It's a large group of us today, so we're going to have a good conversation. We'll see where this goes. And I'm going to first pass it to Aric Perminter. He's going to say a few words about himself, and then I'll bring the rest of the group into the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate spending the time with you and this distinguished panel today. My name is Aric Perminter. I'm the founder and chairman with Lynx Technology Partners. I also have the privilege of being one of the co-founders of Cyversity, which is a nonprofit focused on bridging the gap between women and minorities. And I've also been fortunate enough to been tagged to work alongside of one of our other distinguished members who will introduce themselves shortly to be a part of the HISPI think tank. Project Cerebellum. So really excited to be here. And I'd like to turn it over to my friend Pam to introduce herself. And thank you for joining us, Pam.
I'm looking forward to being part of this panel. Thank you, Aric. And my name is Pam Kamath. I'm a founder of Adaptive.AI, I provide technology consulting services in AI, risk management, and data. Been in technology for 25-something odd years, worked across a number of different roles, and more importantly, in healthcare, where my focus has been over the last 10 to 12 years, supporting a number of leaders in addressing their business challenges around data, AI, regulations, and whatnot. So very excited to be part of this group, and I look forward to speaking on AI, which is the topic of the day.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Pam. I appreciate it. Darrell, my friend, welcome. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, thank you, Aric. I'm Darrell Hawkins, and I come in as an IT statesman, if you will, and been in the industry for over 3 decades and working in both IT and cybersecurity. And I've had the wonderful experience of being able to work in healthcare, transportation, manufacturing, and most of my career in financial services. So I'm happy to be here and join in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. And Taiye, welcome, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. I'll give you the short version. Just like Darrell, I've been in technology over 3 decades, been in information security almost 3 decades as well. Founded the Holistic Information Security Practitioner Institute here in Atlanta, Georgia, about 20 years ago. And our claim to fame is we've trained a lot of aspiring CISOs and CISOs for, I would say, 60% of the Fortune 500, going back almost 20 years. So last year, we founded a think tank called Project Cerebellum. So HISPI has that think tank. We're kind of incubating that think tank. So it's made up of CIOs, CISOs, great entrepreneurs like Aric, who's not only a friend, but he's also a mentor. And we've published our first deliverable, I'd say, within 90 days of launching the think tank. So we created a trusted AI model, which pretty much is based on the NIST AI risk management framework, but mapped across about 20 different crosswalk to 20 different, I'll say, areas, including standards like the 6 ISO standards around AI risk management, as well as the White House executive order and some of the regulatory compliance like HIPAA, GDPR, etc. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell, and that's the short version, by the way.
You've done a few things, Taiye. Well, this is going to be fun. So I want to start off with this question, and I'm going to pass it to Pam first, and I'd like everybody's viewpoint on this. Because in the last few weeks, I've had a chance to talk to a lot of people, and 2 things come up: data and applications. We have a lot of guidelines, frameworks, laws, regulations, what have you, around how to manage data for privacy. We have a lot of standards and whatnot around how to build apps and use apps securely, and a lot of conversation around supply chain. So my question is, why do we put this special label around AI when AI, to me, and what I've heard the last few weeks, is a lot of data through an app? So Pam, to you, is that being too simplistic? How come we need to have this special view on AI? Or do we?
It's a lot more complex than that. When we take a step back and look at how artificial intelligence as such has evolved over the years, it was predominantly data. It was predominantly just building code. If you look at machine learning, right, it was all about building massive amount of source code. And then the way you would crunch that, if you're looking at, even if you take a step back, even before deep learning or generative AI, it was mostly rule-based algorithms. And the way these algorithms worked was pretty much crunching data. And when you layer in machine learning on top of that, what you're really doing is you're letting the code itself adapt, develop on its own based on the results obtained through this data. So for at least over a decade, there was really no applications that stood up this machine learning techniques, meaning we didn't have IoTs, we did not have applications that we build today in our mobile telephones. It was a standalone. It was just these programs running and crunching data. So it made so much more sense to focus on regulations related to data. And if you even look at deeply, the programs developed were mostly for financial services, these rule-based applications. We did not see AI as much in supply chain or in healthcare, in other places where typically you need capabilities to host data. And in these other places, manufacturing, healthcare, there were other regulations, FDA, and IEEE was very much focused on regulations that was mostly comprising for both applications and hardware. So at some point, we kind of converged on this, deep learning and generative AI. Now you need applications to host data. So it's pretty, sticky, in terms of how would you layer in the necessary safeguards that take the best of both, and you're not repeating, meaning you're not creating duplicates. Has been a pretty interesting ride from that standpoint, because you have privacy laws that focus on data. Then you have, of course, the GDPR, and then you have other laws within manufacturing and other places. And then you're now looking at how do we create a framework that brings in the best of the two realms that we are looking at, that is both applications and of course, data. And the reason why I say we need AI governance, that under that sits the data governance and other things. So long story, but that's really how I think we found ourselves where we are today.
Well said. Well said. I'd love to hear Darrell's perspective on that as well.
No, I think Pam is right. I think it's a little more complicated than, we look at it like, hey, what's the big deal, right? We've been doing something that looks and smells like AI for the last 10, 15 years, right? But it's gotten a little more complicated than that, in that when we start to use these, like Pam said, you start out with machine learning, then you go to predictive analysis, then start analyzing that data, and then you start using the output of that data for things like, in healthcare, I think that's where you were going, Pam. In healthcare, the eligibility of folks, for instance, to get certain types of operations based on that data that you have, right? So it gets a lot more complicated when you look at where we were, which was, hey, we're just going to analyze things in the past and say, yeah, this must be right, so let's do it, to, hey, we're going to take that and say, well, Darrell, based on this, I think in one of the popular movies, they called it precogs, right? The people that predicted whether you were going to have a crime before you did it, right? So I think that's what we're nervous of. Like, how do we use that data in a socially sensible manner?
That makes perfect sense. So just to kind of layer in another comment, right? I talked about healthcare, and I also talked about supply chain, manufacturing particularly, where you use industrial IoTs. But when you take healthcare, when you look at medical devices, and I have worked in the past in a number of different places that use medical devices, it brings its own layer of FDA requirements in terms of how you want to document and protect those devices from both safety and efficacy standpoint, which is pretty much what the core is of any regulation. And then when you look at some of the things there, when you start peeling apart different domains of that regulation, then there is data protection, then there is privacy. Within that is embedded data requirements. Now, not only do you have how the device need to be protected, but also the data within the device. And then came other regulations. I was challenged on one of the healthcare companies that I was working for, a global pharma company that had massive presence in Europe. And they were now having to comply with GDPR. But then they're also in compliance with a number of other regulations and requirements around these medical devices. Now, how do you take the two and marry it in a way that you're providing proper documentation for the GDPR and still making sure that you're not leaving any stones unturned, because some of the nuances between certain points within the regulation can be pretty tricky to navigate. And I'm starting to see how this can be so much painful for companies who have poured money into supporting other regulations, and then we are layering in the AI Act and the GDPR. I mean, it's crazy the amount of compliance and the money that gets spent just in trying to keep sanity across these multiple different regulations. I just wanted to kind of throw that in as well.
Yeah. So Taiye, is it the unknown? Because I think, Darrell, you started to pull on the unknown, right? And Pam, that gray area that you're referencing is, what do we do about that area that we haven't figured out yet? Is it the worry of the unknown, Taiye?
Wow, it's like you were reading my mind, Aric. So at the risk of oversimplifying this, and I'm not going to, I agree with everything Pam and Darrell say, but I'm not going to get into the technical details. And I'm going to look at things from the consumer standpoint or perspective. So back in 20, 30 years ago, unfortunately, we preached the security message using what they call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. At the risk of sounding really colorful, I'm going to replace the D with C. So you can translate that in your mind, but I can't say it. So the F is for fear. There's a fear. The U is for unknown, because it's almost like uncharted territory, right? And then the C is, it's cool. So when you have those three things combined, nobody wants to be left behind. So on the fair side, nobody wants AI to potentially want to take over, right? Humans don't want AI to completely take over, right? We still want to have our own autonomy, right? At least most humans, right? And I'll probably say most reasonable humans still want to have some level of control. They don't want the technology to control them. So there's that fear that if I don't jump on the bandwagon, this may actually end up destroying me or destroying us. I know that's an extreme, it's irrational, but it's still a fear, right? Going back to Terminator, things like that. And then the unknown is, what is going to be the impact in terms of our jobs, our livelihoods, right? Everybody has to be thinking about that, right? Whether you're retired, if you're not thinking about that for yourself, you're probably thinking about that for your loved ones, the younger folks. So there's the unknown of what is going to be the impact, both positive and negative. And then you have the cool factor. We had the same thing with cloud. It became very cool to be in the cloud. The US federal government was the first to say cloud first. It's the former White House CIO, who was also the CTO for Washington, D.C., Vivek Kundra, said, we're going to go cloud first. And that really spurred a lot of cloud adoption, not only in government, but in the commercial space as well. So AI has all those three things combined. It's not us trying to preach. We're not pushing it. I mean, as security folks, we're actually probably the ones who are most on the fence, especially security leaders, because we just don't realize, if we think about AI, we think about how can we use it to automate, maybe more threat intelligence, maybe more offensive security, maybe more detection capability, response, recovery capabilities, but we're not thinking about it from, oh, wow, how can this make the company better in general? That's the job of the CTO or the CIO. And in some cases now with the federal government or White House executive order AI, the chief AI officer's responsibility to figure out how to do it safely and securely and to get benefit from AI. So, but I think, Aric, to your point, I think the unknown is probably the biggest factor. But I think the cool factor is also kind of overshadowing the unknown factor. But there's still a general fear.
I think you're right. When I talk to the tech people like myself, it's cool, right? This AI thing is cool. You talked about offensive security and being able to prepare the offensive measures against threats in our environment, right? But when I talk to folks that are not in the technical industry like us, there's that fear. They're like, oh, this thing is going to take my job. I'll be unemployed, right? I think there was I don't want to misrepresent the school, but I think Dulville College in Buffalo, New York had a commencement speech this week, and they used an AI-generated commencement speech with a robot to talk to the kids, right? And, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, wow, they're preparing us that the future is going to be this AI thing is going to take our jobs, right? Cool, but scary.
Well said. I'm sorry, Pam. I have to chime in on this because over the weekend I was walking and I happened to walk past a fast food restaurant that everyone was tickled to death about, right? And they're going through the drive-through and I can hear them in their car. Well, lo and behold, the fast food restaurant deployed AI to take orders. So no humans were involved in whatsoever. By the time they pulled up to the front, the human did the transaction with the monies, but AI was taking the order. So I had to throw that in there because that kind of piggybacks off of what you're saying. Is that a positive or a negative in that scenario, right? Because it's probably helping the company deliver orders more accurately, right? But it's replacing someone's job at the end of the day, or a portion of someone's job. Sorry, Pam, over to you.
No, it's kind of going back to the question Sean raised about application versus data, because something else triggered that thought for me as well, is that I know we started talking about how, you know, these two came about differently and we're converging on that in the realm of AI. But then again, I ran across a really great article from McKinsey, which made me think further because we kind of keep talking about AI in the way that it's unfolding today, but that's very much focused on generative AI. Again, if you want to kind of put more distinction on that, we are talking about large language models. And now we are even focused on multimodal, looking at GPT-4o, which is multimodal. So within generative AI, we are looking at transformer models, which is now everything around, ChatGPT and all the things that we are seeing, all the competition around that. But then there is also the traditional AI before ChatGPT was released, which had made significant inroads in healthcare. I mean, we cannot forget that AI, because those systems, especially used in radiology and other places, had matured significantly. I mean, even before large language models came about, there's big talks about how what we knew back then as AI would bring significant shift in the dollars that it would add to the economy. And the risks of that is kind of different from the risks of generative AI. And I still hope that in the midst of this craziness that we are looking at, we don't forget that domain, the AI domain that was maturing, especially in healthcare, in manufacturing, other places. Also built on deep learning algorithms, which was kind of the next generation. But those have very distinct risks related to model drifts and not just data poisonings. When you think about AI, there's federated learning. And as a result of that, you have data poisoning, backdoor data issues in the way the data is pieced and weaved and fed to the model from testing standpoint and training standpoint. But model drifts is pretty significant. I mean, and I kind of get nervous sometimes that we get so carried away with generative AI that we forget about the AI that we were using and we knew of very dearly before, ChatGPT was released. I just wanted to make sure, going back to what Sean, you were saying in the applications and versus data, there is also that AI models that we cannot forget.
Yeah, and I want to bring those three things. So data, apps, the models, and Taiye, you mentioned cloud, because I think there's the delivery of this stuff, and Pam, you mentioned we have it on the phones now. I mean, with 5G and 6G coming, this stuff's going to be distributed everywhere. And so the reason I asked that question up front was, are we throwing everything we know away because we think this is so new and we have to look at it completely different? Or are there things we can leverage, experiences we can learn from? The cloud is the best example, I think, that I can draw upon to say, and Taiye, you noted it, that the government said, let's go here first, and really put a strong plan around how we do that. And yes, you have to train differently. The systems look different. We have new technologies that emerge from that, containers and the way we deliver apps to those environments as well. But a lot of it's coming back on-prem as well today as well. So I guess the question I have is, because of the FUC, do we kind of throw everything we know away and start looking at this fresh? Or is that what we're doing? And should we perhaps kind of find out where the deltas are and what we know and where we think we might be going?
I would prefer the latter, right?
Of course.
I would prefer that we learn from experience. So if you think about cloud first, the biggest driver for Vivek Kundra at the time, because I literally read almost every article, every presentation he did, I became a big fan of his, because I'm like, if somebody can figure out a way to like convince the government to like be innovative, like they have to be a rock star, like they have to, or either that they've just scammed everybody. But this guy is either a genius or he's a biggest scam artist, but he was able to pull it off. But the biggest driver was that the federal government had I think it was like 3,000 plus data centers, and they weren't in the business of being like building and managing data centers. So he was like, first of all, we need to consolidate all this data centers. So the whole concept of data center migration, I mean, it felt like the federal government had the biggest need for that, because some data centers were like really bad and some were really good. So I think that was like the biggest driver, like efficiency and effectiveness of the way of the IT spend, right? And I can't remember the exact money, but it was in billions of dollars. And the whole idea was that if the federal government could move to the cloud, public cloud services, which obviously created the need for FedRAMP, and stuff like that, to make sure it's done securely, safely and securely. I think we can borrow from that. But to your point, some of it is moving back on-prem. So maybe we can say, okay, what didn't we get right in the cloud-first strategy? And we can apply the same concept to AI, because it's technology. At the end of the day, again, without the risk of oversimplifying this, cloud is technology, AI is technology, right? I mean, there's different facets to it, there's different aspects to it, but it's at the end of the day, it's about managing technology risk. So if we can maybe learn from what did we do right for the cloud, because cloud is now mainstream, right? Everybody is in the cloud one way or the other. Every consumer, every business in the world, every nonprofit is on the cloud in one shape or form. In fact, small businesses tend to use more cloud services. The average SMB, I think the research I did, has at least 50 cloud services they use. And in many cases, free, which means they're giving their data away without any form of, protection, right, from a legal standpoint. But I think we can borrow from what we did with the cloud, 10, 15 years ago, and some of the lessons learned. So we're not reinventing the wheel and we're not repeating the same mistakes.
Just to build on that, I have a slightly different take. And I think you're right, from the risk standpoint, it makes perfect sense. But I think the way we sold cloud to the corporate leaders was somewhat misguided, because when you look at where we landed today, it's more expensive to manage your capabilities on cloud along with your data compared to on-prem. But if we had sold it in a different manner through different optics, our cybersecurity risks are getting more and more sophisticated. Data risks are getting even more crazier. There is so much unknown with the data itself in terms of how data can be misused at scale and what it may do to society at large. If we were to look at hosting all of those capabilities today on data centers on-prem, we would not have a mechanism or the governance to manage the sophisticated cybersecurity risks and data risks that we have today. And I think in so many ways, cloud answers that. But it was unfortunately sold under the umbrella of cost optimization, which it is not. Sometimes leaders get clouded with that, right? Now they're like going back at their technology leaders and said, what the heck, you guys sold this and I'm paying more for this nonsense than I ever did. If I had put all this in my data center, I would have had a better chance of managing my cost more optimally, right? But then if we had sold that under the risk standpoint, we would have been in a much better place. But then to twist that story, obviously, is always a challenge, because getting them to agree on one thing, right? Getting them to align on one thing is almost always very problematic. And it's somewhat dramatic, actually. Now to go back and reshape that story is the challenge. But I really think cloud is the answer. And even if you look at the way large language models are coming about in terms of what it can solve from problems standpoint, between cloud, each of these big techs having their own language models, which I have no problems with, by the way. I know we talk a little bit about the digital divide, and that's my favorite subject. But the energy consumption and all of that, I would rather they have it and own it and manage it. And smaller models for very specific needs. But I think it's going to become that ecosystem, that platform where each big tech will have fantastic cloud infrastructure with all the capabilities we need to build great applications, and the backdrop being the large language models that they're able to host and provide. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. It may kind of come through in the future for us, but I think it's going to be a challenge again to go back to our leaders and say, by the way, we want to do this because risks will get more and more sophisticated, geopolitical, and everything is starting to emerge as the big problem, right? So I just kind of wanted to bring that back. Taiye, I know you were talking about risk. You're absolutely right, but there's been a bit of a misnomer in how this was sold to begin with.
Yeah, but that's interesting, Pam, because you're right. I think everyone was sold on cost optimization for cloud, and that's not really true. They got the first bill, and then everybody knew that wasn't really the case. But I think the introduction of risk, as Taiye talked about, when you have your own data center, right, you're containing your risk to whatever those four walls are. But the risk has grown with large data sets and AI and machine learning, and not through your own company risk, but now you have a service provider to you, and they have a third party to them. Now you, from a risk standpoint, your risks are 4 layers deep, right? You're not only looking at second party, you're looking at third party and fourth party and what they're doing with your data. And if they're developing code and developing things based on this large data set of information that you put together, where's the borderline of that risk? And I think that is really the challenge, right? You can no longer say that, well, I gave the data to Aric, and Aric gave the data to Pam, and Pam gave the data to Taiye. Therefore, I'm no longer responsible for it. Right? It just doesn't work anymore.
There is only 3 ways you can manage a risk: transfer, accept, or mitigate. Right? Transfer by far is the best way if you're looking at managing risks with third party that has better systems and they're in a better position, equipped to manage it, right? If you look at all the capabilities that they have, Azure or AWS, its transfer is far better choice than accepting and mitigating in your own landscape. It's just that how well you do that, I think, boils down to that.
When you talk about risk versus privacy, though, right? You're right? You can transfer it, but when you talk about privacy, us having a conversation is a transference, right? We can be on a call with somebody in Europe, and then we violate GDPR rules because we've said something on a call that constitutes as a transferring of data. Right? So that's where it really gets tricky, right?
So that is the data at rest, data in transit, and now data in process is the new risk.
Right.
So who owns what? That what I call as roles and responsibilities between third party and the owner of the data or the custodian of the data. I think is really what it boils down to. Data at rest, as you know, most cloud providers are supposed to take care of that. They're accountable for that because they provide you the guardrails, all of them. But once the data is in transit, it's just a handoff, right? The roles and responsibilities become a bit of a challenge, and how well you define that. I always go to different companies, and one of the first things I ask them is, how do you have your roles divided between your cloud provider and yourself? And obviously there are many other parties in between, their customers and their third parties, the transfer of data. Where is this handoffs managed and taken care of contractually or through other means?
Taiye, I know you're talking about to get the way in because of the cloud security background, plus the work that we're doing over on the Project Cerebellum. So please, I'd love to get your thoughts on what Darrell and Pam was just talking about as well.
Sure. So I know I opened up a can of worms when I mentioned cloud, and that led to you mentioning privacy. So I'm going to say something very controversial. When it comes to AI, I think we can kiss privacy goodbye. In another 5 years, I think with the way things are going, with the adoption of generative AI, I think we can kiss privacy goodbye. That's my prediction. That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that we do it so well that we actually leverage AI to strengthen privacy. But I doubt if that's going to happen. Right.
And Taiye, are you saying that based off of kind of the harmonizing of the various control frameworks and kind of what you're seeing, Lena? Why? I need to understand the why.
Okay, so in the NIST AI risk management framework, so we have folks at NIST that are way smarter than all of us. Well, at least me, 50 of me combined. And those folks only have one control out of 72 that speaks to privacy. One. Not because it's not important, but because it's like the train's already left the station. AI's lifeblood, for lack of a better word, is data. So if you don't have if an AI engine or platform doesn't have the data, it's useless. So its ability to take in data, good data, right, is what makes AI very unique. And it being able to crunch that data and present it in ways that we love and, makes our jobs, our lives easier and helps us make decisions better, or even sometimes make decisions for us, like self-driving cars, right? You wouldn't catch me in one of those. But anyway, that's a different conversation.
I agree with you, Taiye, but there is a big problem with that. For me, you have to distinguish between what privacy is and what privacy is for. There are completely two distinct philosophical views, because what privacy is for, when you talk to our kids, when you ask them what privacy is, it's completely different for them. They probably will not even think about it. But when you ask a mother of two what privacy is, she will have a different answer. But when you talk about somebody who has a lot of money in many different retirement funds in their 60s, and you ask them what privacy is, they'll have a different answer. So privacy is a very personal thing. But what privacy is for is something we all can agree upon, which is when it shifts in large scale, there is, unfortunately, leaves society vulnerable. And the power is transferred. When power is transferred, it's so, there's so much imbalance that a society, a significant scale, will lose its voice in how the data can be handled. And given what AI can do in terms of its ability to nudge, manipulate people to doing things, over nudging, ultra nudging, or hyper nudging is what it's called, I think. Now that you can even sense sentiments with GPT-4o, we have to fight hard for privacy. I'm not sure, probably it's not me, but like I said, what privacy is for is very, very important for the society. And I agree with you, but it's a fight that citizens or communities should not give up on.
And I think you're right, Pam. I think that when we talk about privacy, all right, let's say the bad word, TikTok, right? Right? You talk about the implications of social media and the AI engines in the back rooms that tell us who we like, what we should eat, where we should go, right? And then you multiply that on a global scale, right? And you talk about where's the line of safety? Where's my data private versus giving it to someone in China, right? Do they have a right, because I signed the license agreement, do they have the right to use my data, right? And that goes back to what we talked about in the past, like where's the human element in this that's auditing the data sets to say what's really, so if you let that genie loose and say, we're gonna just have it all automated and have nobody auditing that data, then I think that's where we really get in trouble.
And I think even with that, Scarlett Jones, I'm not sure, I would love for somebody to kind of layer in on this particular one, the voice of GPT-4o, when it was released and Sam Altman and his people had that massive demo of what it can do, the fact that it can sense the environment, the fact that it can speak to where you are and how you want AI to integrate into your own personal life. The voice that was used was really, really sweet woman's voice, right? And it was really Scarlett, her name is Johansson, right? Johansson. Yeah. She actually made a big deal about it. And I think that those are the kind of things that I want to highlight as the problems that we may face as a society at large.
So I want to touch on one thing here, and it's this idea. I'm going to go back to the cloud. Sorry. Misguided or not, I think we had a clear use case. You do this, that may be tricky to do. That might look slightly different, but you end up with something different, right? And we knew what that looked like, kind of. Now with certainly with generative AI, it's any use case for anything across any number of partners in the supply chain. I've had a conversation about signature SaaS service that's eating data for who knows why. Cloud storage services eating data, so you can find information in your storage service easier. But where are those services running on a data center or somebody else's cloud? Who has access to those to enable more services on the services that they provide? And it gets really tricky, and everybody's looking for, how can I use this technology for my own benefit to serve other people, but to make more money as well? And I think it becomes, to Taiye's point, I think all of that, all the data somehow, somewhere ends up in a bunch of places and becomes accessible to many at scale. So no question, just a thought.
So I think on a positive note, I think the pros outweighs the cons for AI. I've been doing these panels where I've invited like state CISOs and CIOs. We have one tomorrow in Atlanta at Secure World. It's actually been hosted by CyberSecurity Atlanta chapter. but we're using the Secure World event as kind of the platform. So we're going to have the state of Georgia CIO, who I've known 20 plus years. We're going to have Joy Purser, who's the former Region 4 Director for CISA. She now works for Veritas. And Angela Hinton, who's my attorney when I was with the city of Atlanta as their first CISO. So I always like to ask the audience first, do you think it's a threat, opportunity, or both? And then I'll then ask the panelists, you have to pick one, more of a threat, more of an opportunity. I know where their head's at because I know they're thinking it's both, but I actually prefer that they pick one. And I'd say most panels I've done, they think it's more of an opportunity. And these are CISOs, right? So that's good. So they see the opportunity because with cloud, I know CISOs who said, I'll never move to the cloud. And some of those CISOs ended up being pushed out, not fired, but pushed out. They just had to retire, take early retirement, and now they do work with cloud service providers. So one of them actually is a principal consultant at AWS, right? And 10, 15 years ago, he said, I'll never move to the cloud. So anyway, so I've seen that. So the good news is the security community seems to be open, like cloud, where we're never going to move to some said we're never going to move to the cloud. I've been in CISO roles where we had data centers in the basement right underneath a water fountain. And I said, and we had bomb threats every week. And we had metal detectors into the building. It was a public building. And I said, we should never be in the business of owning our own data center. We need to move everything to the cloud. 2 years later, I was long gone. This organization had a major ransomware attack. And guess what? Workloads were still working, the ones in the cloud. All the on-premise stuff, because of all the technical debt, you fix potholes or you patch systems, right? It's competing dollars. A lot of the on-premise workloads were down for like weeks because there was so much technical debt. But the stuff in the cloud stayed up. I say all that to say, I think there's a lot of, we may have missold the cloud. Some CIOs may have done that, but we can learn from those lessons and say, okay, for this new technology, it's not really new, but ChatGPT makes it sound like it's really new, because now consumers have a seat at the table, right? They can use it, right? And they can experience it. So that's why it's become mainstream. And, the media has done a great job. But I think we can borrow again from those lessons and say, okay, yeah, we're going to put the guardrails in. We're going to try our best to make it safe and secure. We're going to protect privacy. For me, I think the unknown for privacy, as long as I know how my data is being used, I'm fine with it. That's my risk tolerance from a privacy standpoint, right? Now, 20 years ago, I had a different perspective because I lived in the UK and the European mindset is my data is mine, right? My data is mine. Nobody has the right. I never got any junk mail through the post, because privacy is a big deal in the UK, right? Or was a big deal back then. Now I have a different perspective because I've seen the benefit of organizations actually being able to use our data for good use, right? Or you to leverage our data for good use. So my perspective has changed. So to Pam's point, privacy means different things to different people and different generations. And I think if we can change that unknown to known, like giving the consumer the visibility into how their data is being used. But I don't think organizations like OpenAI can do that without being transparent and without being accountable, right? So the privacy principles, transparency, accountability, explainable, all those things, they have to be able to do that. And for me, those are the kind of guardrails that we feel everyone needs to have. Still do it, but still have those guardrails and make them top of mind.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, though, you're absolutely on target that the mantra of the CISO has changed, right? In the past, the CISO's job was, to paraphrase, never let a good disaster go to waste, right? If something happened, you got budget, right? And that's how you built your program. But I think today, if I talk about commercial space, right? Well, if you talk about healthcare and you say, do no evil, we're going to use generative AI for the better of mankind. But in the commercial space, it's all about, what do I like to say, Mr. Perminter? The answer is money. What's the question, right? When you talk about the commercial space, you have to show the return on investment, because big enterprises are not going to use it unless it generates revenue, right? So where's the line between what's commercially profitable and what's bad for society, right? And I think that's our challenge.
And I think I love the way you put it, Darrell, because that is where I think use cases come into play. And I think some of the big companies are doing pretty good job in outlining the use cases for generative AI. That should provide us with some level of guardrails around risk acceptance or risk tolerance. When you look at retail, when you look at entertainment and other places, by far, risk is the last thing that they think about. And obviously we can shape that, have, constructive conversation around that. But when you look at healthcare, obviously our tolerance is a lot different, especially when it comes to data itself. And we do have made some really good headways around privacy enhancing techniques, right? We could layer in some of that, but how these models get trained, unfortunately, is still a big question mark for all of us. And also that's where custom models make a whole lot of sense. Small models that's very specific to that use case, because your risk tolerance is practically zero for some of those things. You obviously want to say, well, if you're using OpenAI, you want to think twice if you for this particular use case. So I like use case as a way to filter out how we want to manage risks. And hopefully that'll kind of, in a way, help us integrate these models, integrate AI into other business capabilities based on use cases and the risk levels that each use case holds, commercial versus healthcare and other sensitive areas.
So Pam, I have to ask, what, and this is for everyone, what is your and each individual's personal use case for AI today? How are you using it today, if at all?
That's a great question. For generative AI, there is a great appetite for sales operations, marketing, virtual assistant. People seem to be very open in wanting to learn how to use, and I've been helping some of my own customers with marketing strategies and how they can layer in generative AI. But I still see a lot of hesitancy in other areas, in the financial services and healthcare, for good reasons, especially around privacy and security. But if you move away from generative AI practice, AI seemed to have a pretty significant hold in financial services and healthcare.
How about yourself, Taiye? How are you using AI today?
So I've actually sat down with CISOs, believe it or not, some state CISOs, to actually help them refine their strategic plan, their vision statement, mission statement, using ChatGPT, believe it or not. So that's one clear use case. From an institute standpoint, HISPI actually moved to a proctor-free platform. So I'm not going to mention the name of the vendor, even though it's in the description. About 5 years ago, we were proctoring exams in person. End of the day, it was a 5-day class. End of the 5 days, I walked around the room, and folks would still find out potentially may have been cheating, right? Because you couldn't watch their screen all the time. And then we started doing like a Zoom type where you watch them, they share their screen, but you just don't know if they have another screen going, right? And so we tried this platform, which is already integrated with a learning management system, which is a proctor-free platform. And it's AI proctored. So this started 4 or 5 years ago. So now all our exams are delivered online. So whether you take a in-person class or instructor-led class, everything is delivered online and it's proctor free. So it's actually proctored by AI. The cameras have to be on. So it knows when they're side reading. It knows when they're talking to somebody in the background. It actually flags that as, hey, that's something you need to review. And you get a report once they've completed the exam. It doesn't stop them from completing the exam, but you're going to get a report and it's going to highlight the areas where there were red flags. So that is a perfect use case because I've had to proctor exams halfway around the world. I actually did a trip to Taiwan once to proctor an exam for 5 auditors. And I flew halfway around the world to spend 12 hours in Taiwan. I'll never do that again, thanks to Proctor Free. Yeah.
Good stuff. How about yourself, Darrell? What do you use cases?
So I'm going to throw the fun factor in there, right? In my spare time as an amateur DJ, right? I'm using AI models to put together playlists, right? So that I never have the same playlist again. So it examines my entire library of music, and I give it parameters based on what type of audience it's going to be, and it puts together a playlist. Of course, the human factor is I still have to understand that when people are dancing or not dancing, right? You still need, again, going back to my statement, you need a human auditor. So AI takes the music, looks at the library, I give it the parameters, it pulls together a nice playlist based on beat matching and pitch, and it says, here, play this, and then I still have to perform the function, right? So just a different spin on all of the heavy duty AI techie talk.
Pun intended, spin.
Most definitely.
So Darrell, you're not worried about that AI replacing you as a DJ?
Well, it's funny because that is a big concern of a lot of DJs, that you can put AI in a studio, right? You can put AI in a studio, in a recording studio or a radio studio or in a DJ booth, and just feed it parameters and it plays automatic. But there's still that human factor, right? So
right.
People are different, right? We know what we like, and
yes, until we become numb to it.
Yeah, right.
We accept it. I have this theory of lowest common denominator. We all end up there, and we're okay with it, and it sucks.
So maybe you can have Darrell.AI or Hawkins.ai that is like a clone, a digital clone of you.
Exactly. How do you know I'm really here now?
Nice.
So I want to share quickly, Aric, on this point, because one could imagine one use case for us, which I'll go and share. We use AI to kind of summarize and find the key points we have during these conversations. So we use that to summarize and find interesting points. We also use it because we have a network of shows where we have a very strict rule of not having promotional content in thought leadership conversations. So we check for somebody trying to pitch their company or product in a show, and they shouldn't be. So we can identify those. A number of months back, and I've talked about this in other episodes, we started to build an AI bot to help people find conversations that we've had, and to then find key points from those conversations to help them learn. We chose to not do that for 2 reasons. One, errors. So it was not accurate. It was placing quotes for people that were not quotes, and there's no me in between that engagement with the end user to verify it. So I didn't want that inaccuracy. And the other was cost, going back to the cloud. If somebody misuses or abuses my bot, who pays for it? This guy. So those 2 risks made me decide not to pursue that particular project.
Interesting. Sean, I did have a question for you specific to this. A lot of the actors and folks in the entertainment businesses worry about AI kind of replacing them. sort of along the themes of replacing the DJ as well. But Sean, do you have a risk for AI kind of outthinking, right? Your the content that you have been successful generating over the year by just training itself, right, on your content? Is there a concern for you there? And if so, what are you thinking about that?
So I'm not too concerned. I think because it is multiple people, I don't know that AI will eventually, perhaps, but this conversation with 5 people thinking on the fly, responding to each other, I almost never prepare for a conversation, and therefore it's very random, my thoughts, and sometimes they're way out there. So it can try to figure out what the heck I'm thinking. Good luck with that. It may over time, of course, be able to do that. But
well said.
I think multiple people, and for the actors and actresses, I think Marco's had direct experience with that with his spouse and being part of that whole strike. And I think your point, was it you, Darrell, that said money's the answer? What's the question? Right. I think it's all boil down to who has control and where the money flows.
Well said. Well said.
And I know we're at kind of at time here, and I'm going to summarize in a second. But for you, Aric.
For me, we are actually utilizing it in sales operations, as Pam indicated. Our specific use case is around looking at older winning proposal language and pulling those winning themes forward in future responses, but building upon those responses by leveraging AI to lean forward on the topic. And it's been a true needle mover for us, both from the perspective of positioning higher value services with our customers, but more importantly, better defining how we operate and what we're positioning as a company. So it's making us a bit smarter, if you will, from a sales operations perspective.
Love it. At some point, you're going to have a conversation about that proposal. You have to be able to speak to it.
You do.
And I think that's probably where we will see us all heading towards, is how can we be smart as a result of this tool. But I think we'll always be starved for human element. And it's just how we are made. And that gives me confidence that no matter what, we won't have a situation where AI will practically rule over some of the things that we've been doing for the longest, because we as human beings, we value, no matter what, that human touch. And also we hear more about soft skills being the most important factor in future leadership and things of that nature. And I think I cannot enough emphasize on that.
Yeah, and for me, Pam, I think for the first time, this is the first time that I've personally been willing to relax some of the controls that I place on my data for the benefit of the efficiencies that it's going to deliver to me. Mm-hmm. And I think the more value that continues to deliver, the broader or the more relaxed I'm going to continue to be. But so far, it has probably been able to increase my personal productivity by about 25%, and our team's overall productivity probably by about 40%, realistically.
That's kind of pretty much what I hear as well with some of the people that I speak with. So you're very spot on that, because people are starting to see that they are working smarter and not so much harder. And obviously, that's the shift we want to make. The reason why I say there's two things. One is not only will it make us smarter as in how we will be positioned in front of our own customers and vendors or providers, but also it's the creator's economy right now. We can create amazing things with this tool. I use it because I love cooking. And it's amazing to see that I can say, I only have like these 3 ingredients. Give me 5 different options, and this better be a global cuisine. And it baffles me each time. It's like, oh my goodness, I always, because I've been cooking for the longest, and it's my passion, I always keep thinking that, of course I have all these cool things I can do, but I am actually amazed at what it's able to do for me, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So it's fun. It's fun, actually.
Something that was probably inedible to anybody but myself.
You still have to have the technique. You do. Yeah. Baking's different than barbecuing, I think. But well, this has been fantastic. I think what I took away from this. Clear use cases. I think we kind of close with that as well, and with a view for what the outcomes are. What are we trying to achieve with it? And to your point earlier, Pam, kind of scoping that, taking it directly to something that we can really focus on, so that we're not trying to boil the ocean there, I think really helps. And then we can switch to looking at risk tolerance. And then I think some of the other points we made were leverage what we already know, right? And what can we learn from the past where we've encountered something like this before? And I think with that, we have some guardrails, and I think we're going to have many more conversations. I think some ideas on what guardrails might look like would be a good one next. Right? So indeed. Well, Pam, Aric, Darrell, Taiye, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And the goal is to get everybody to think, right? And I'm certain we did that today. So thanks everybody for listening and watching to this episode of Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody. Please do subscribe, share with your friends and enemies, and stay tuned for more. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Pentera, the leader in automation security validation, allows organizations to continuously test the integrity of all cybersecurity layers by emulating real-world attacks at scale to pinpoint the exploitable vulnerabilities and prioritize remediation towards business impact. Learn more at Pentera.io.